Chapter 17. Around the Fire. Indy quietly slipped out of the mansion and walked to the rear where the drivers waited near their carriages. He asked Effer Dumas's carriage and was directed to the driver. "Mr. Dumas said you should take me back to the hotel." The driver looked dubiously at him. "Are you sure? He told me to wait for him." "He's staying the night." Indy leaned forward. "Too much ouzo." "Already?" "Already," Indy said, gravely. The man nodded and climbed into his seat as Indy slid into the carriage. None of what he'd said was true, but he didn't feel guilty about stranding Dumas. When he arrived at the hotel, Nikos was lying on his cot, intently reading a book. "Have you seen Dorian?" "No, she hasn't returned," the boy said, rising to his feet. He ran a hand over his short-cropped hair. "You're back early." "Maybe not early enough. Who is this Colonel Mandraki?" "That's what I was going to tell you about when she came into the room. He is Alex, her boyfriend." No wonder she'd turned cool towards him since they'd arrived in Delphi. "He's a very dangerous man, and I think Dr. Bellakamis is the same when he is around. That is why I brought you the moly. For your protection." "Thanks. Now tell me more about the Americans who came to see me." "One was tall and thin, with red hair and a little beard on his chin." Nikos rubbed his chin, indicating the sparse beard. "The other one was shorter and had a big beard. And look, I have something for you." He reached under the counter and held out a coiled whip. "Your tall friend wanted me to give this to you before you saw him. He said you would know about it. Then he was going to walk into your room, but the soldiers came." Indy took the whip and ran his hands over it. That confirmed it. Shannon was here, but he still didn't know the identity of the other man. "Indy, I have another question about America." He wasn't in the mood for small talk. "It's not a very good time, but go ahead." "Is it true that Americans put applesauce on their bread?" Indy stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He held up the book he'd been reading. "In here, the girl eats bread like that." It was a ragged-looking copy of 17. "Where did you get that book?" "One of the Americans gave it to me. The shorter one with the beard." Indy remembered that day in Ladome in Paris when Ted Conrad had talked about meeting Booth Tarkington and showed him his used copy. He took the book and opened the cover. It was signed by Tarkington and inscribed, "To Ted, best of luck in your writing." But what in the world was Conrad, his old history professor, doing here? And why was Shannon? They didn't know each other. And why did Mandraki want to keep them away from him? "Look, I found this in the book," Nico said. "Do you know him?" He handed Indy a picture of a handsome, smiling man who looked about Indy's age. He was standing beside what looked like a Greek statue, and behind him were the stone steps of an amphitheater. "Never seen him in my life," Indy said. He tapped the edge of the photograph against the counter and frowned. "You said my friends were taken by soldiers. Were they asked nicely to go with them, like an escort?" He shook his head. "Nothing nice about it. They were taken like criminals, and Colonel Mandraki was the one who was in charge." "Where would they take them?" "I don't know, but they left in the direction of the ruins." "That's a start. I'm going to look for them. Can I keep this?" He held up the photograph. "If you'd let me go with you." Indy hesitated. "I don't want you to get into trouble, Nikos." "I can help you find them. I know good hideouts near the ruins. We can look there." Indy slipped the photograph inside his jacket pocket and hooked the whip on his belt. "Okay, but just remember that we're not playing hide and seek with these soldiers. This is serious business." "I know. Do you have the moly?" Indy forced a smile. "Yeah." A few minutes later, they mounted horses. Indy touched a hand to his sore ribs, then nudged the side of his horse, and they rode off at a gallop. As they neared the ruins, Indy gestured towards the workshop, and they turned off the road. The place appeared quiet and deserted, but he wanted to check anyhow. They dismounted near the stables and walked cautiously towards the workshop. He tried the door and was surprised to find it unlocked. Slowly he pushed it open. A kerosene lamp was burning on the long table. He moved along the rows of shelves stacked with stone tablets, looking down each aisle. There was no sign of Dorian or anyone else. He was heading back towards the door when he noticed something white and filamentous protruding from one of the lockers. He dropped to one knee and felt the material. He was almost sure he knew what it was. He opened the door. He was right. It was Dorian's dress, the one she'd worn this evening to the reception. She'd been here and changed. The fact that she hadn't gone back to the hotel meant she and Mandrake were in a hurry. He was about to close the door when he noticed a sheet of paper taped to the back wall of the locker. On it were 3 columns of numbers. The first 2 sets of numbers read across the page is 1, 4:23 p.m., 3 minutes and 5 seconds. 1, 7:28 p.m., 3 minutes and 11 seconds. It didn't take long to figure out what it was. The number on the left represented days, and day 1, he was certain, was the day they arrived and had started monitoring the vapors. In the center column were the times of the risings, and the numbers on the right represented the length of time between risings. He ran his finger down the page and realized that it was not only a record of previous risings, but a schedule of future ones for the next several days. One set of numbers was underlined. It read 9, 11:41 a.m., 6 minutes and 53 seconds. Indy counted the days since they had arrived. Today was the 8th. Tomorrow morning the king would visit the ruins and the vapors would rise at 11:41. That could be useful. He quickly memorized the times of the risings for the next couple of days. "There's nobody here," Nico said. "I know. They were here and left, and wherever they went, Dorian didn't want to wear her dress. Maybe she didn't want it to get dirty." Indy nodded. "Could be. Know of any dirty hiding places where they might have taken my friends?" Nikos thought a moment. "There's a cave above the ruins. Do you think Dorian knows about it?" "I know she does." "How do you know?" Indy persisted. Nikos suddenly looked uneasy. His dark eyes darted about. He scuffled his shoes on the floorboards. "You see, one day when I was 12, I did something bad." "Go on." "I followed Dr. Bellacamus and a boyfriend up there. I snuck in the cave after them and watched them do it." "This boyfriend? You mean the colonel?" Nico shook his head. "No, someone else. A helper. Someone like you. A student." So she made a habit of getting involved with her graduate students, Indy thought. Real nice. He didn't know why, but he felt jealous, betrayed. "Come on, let's go take a look." They followed a trail to the ruins and ascended to the old stadium which was beyond the theater. From there, Nikos led the way to a wooded path. He pointed towards the dark mountainside above them. "It's right about there." Indy didn't see anything but the silhouette of trees against the moonlit sky. It didn't look promising, but they didn't have much choice. The path was steep and twisted around boulders. With almost every step, shoots of pain flashed through his sore ribs and thigh, but he kept going, impelled by the dark cloud of Dorian's betrayal. Finally, Nikos stopped and pointed. The moonlight revealed a ledge about 3 feet wide. "It's just a little farther," he whispered. The ledge curved around an outcropping of rock. It narrowed. Indy's feet were only inches from the edge. He was suddenly grateful that the darkness obscured the view below. It didn't seem so dangerous when he couldn't see how far he would fall if he slipped. "Stop!" Nikos whispered. He was pressed up against the wall, his face in shadows. He was about to ask what was wrong when he heard the clatter of footsteps ahead on the ledge. Someone was moving along just ahead of them. The rocks hid whoever it was. There was no time to do anything but try to melt into the boulders. He pressed himself against the wall, then recoiled in pain as a jagged stone poked him in the side. The footsteps grew louder. He saw movement in the dark. Whoever it was stopped, probably sensing their presence. They were trapped. A weird, pathetic bleating cut through the silence, and Nikos laughed. It's just a goat with three little ones behind her. What are they doing here? They live up here. They're wild. Nikos softly called the goat, but the animal obdurately held its ground. Is there any other way we can go? Indy asked. No. Indy looked around and spotted a thick branch hanging over the trail. He unhitched his whip, and with a smooth snap of his wrist snared the branch. Then he swung out for the ledge and around the goats, landing on the far side of them. Move it, he hissed, and the goat and its little ones hurried ahead. How did you do that? Nikos asked, amazed. Lucky, I guess. Let's go. They cautiously worked their way around the rocks until they could see the mouth of the cave. Light flickered from the interior. Someone was there. Indy patted Nikos on the shoulder. Good going. You were right. They edged closer. A tree grew from somewhere above the ledge, and its branches shrouded the cave's entrance. No wonder they hadn't seen the light from the fire when Nikos had first pointed out its location. As they moved within a few feet of the opening, Indy heard the murmur of voices. Behind him, Nikos cleared his throat. Indy turned to him, touched a finger to his mouth, but he tripped over a loose rock, sending it tumbling into the ravine. There! Did you hear that? It was Dorian's voice. Alex, go out and take a look. Indy held his breath. Oh, God. If that eagle was his protector, he needed its help now. I was just out there, Mandrake barked. I told you, it's goats. Stupid little goats. Sorry. I guess I'm nervous, Dorian answered. Indy wiped his brow. He thanked God. He thanked the eagle. He thanked whoever else might be responsible for keeping Mandrake in the cave. He carefully moved forward until he reached the corner of the opening. He dropped to one knee and peered into the cave. A fire burned in the center of the cavern, its smoke disappearing through an unseen chimney in the roof. Several figures were seated around the blaze. Dorian's back was to him, and next to her was Mandrake. Across from them, he could see two soldiers with rifles. His eyes adjusted to the flickering light, and now he could see two bodies lying prone beyond the fire. They were on their stomachs, hands tied behind them. Beyond them were three long, shallow holes and a shovel lying on the ground. Was this an excavation site that he didn't know about? He doubted it. The holes looked more like graves. New ones. 3 of them. Alex? What? This was a big mistake, Dorian said. We should have left them alone. No, it wasn't a mistake. If I'd allowed them to talk to Jones, he'd be gone, and we need him tomorrow. By now he knows something is going on. He won't show up at the ruins. He'll be looking for his friends. We can control that situation, Mandrake assured her. Indy motioned Nikos to move back. Cautiously, they edged away from the cave entrance until they were out of hearing range. Listen, Nikos, I want you to go back to the hotel. If anyone asks for me, say I came back early and went to bed. What are you going to do? Find a safe place to keep watch. Sooner or later, Dorian and Mandrake will leave. That's when I make my move. While Nikos headed down towards the ruins, Indy worked his way above the ledge until he found a spot with a view that would allow him to see anyone leaving the cave. That is, if he could stay awake. He gathered together leaves for a cushion and sat down, propping his back against a tree. He rubbed his sore thigh and adjusted the band covering his ribs. He tried to relax and puzzled again over what Dorian and Mandrake would want with Shannon and Conrad, and why the two men had come here. But the more he thought about it, the more baffled he became. He closed his eyes, started to doze, and jerked awake. He stood up and paced to stay alert. Just as he settled down again, he heard a noise, not from below, but from the rise above him. He turned his head and listened. Must be the goats. Below him he saw a dancing shadow. He leaned forward and watched. Then he realized it was light from the fire in the cave. They'd probably just stoked it with more wood. He readjusted his position, hunkering lower against the trunk as he tried to get comfortable. He hugged himself, rubbing his arms. It was chilly and damp. If the four in the cave were taking turns watching their captives, it was going to be a long night. His eyelids felt heavy again. He blinked, rubbed his cheeks, and stared ahead. He imagined Dorian and Mandrake huddled by the fire, staying warm. Then the image slid away and shifted. He and Dorian were in the berth on the train, snuggled together. Warm, safe. But then he sensed something ominous. It was near, but he couldn't see it. It was a man, a blond-haired man, staring down at him. The same man who had followed Dorian after she'd spoken to him. The man who had disappeared on the train. The man pointed and his mouth moved. What was he saying? A warning about something, but Indy couldn't hear him clearly. Indy jerked awake, shaking his head. Just a dream. Stay awake. He rubbed his arms, but a few minutes later he drifted off again. Voices. Someone was disturbing his sleep. He should know who it was. He should do something, but the voices blended with a dream in which he was back in Chicago. Dorian's voice. Dorian didn't belong in Chicago. He blinked his eyes open and took his bearings. I'm on the mountain, waiting. But for what? Then it all came back. The moon was dipping behind the mountain, but there was still enough light to see the ledge. No one was there, but a man's voice issued from the cave. Then Dorian's voice. They were arguing. How long had he slept? He pulled out his watch. He'd been here more than 2 hours. I'm leaving, Dorian said. All right, I'm coming with you, the man answered. He spoke in a lower voice to someone else. Then Dorian emerged from the cave. Indy peered down at the ledge as Mandrake followed her. He watched them until they were out of sight. He waited, listened. The sound of their footsteps receded, then vanished. He stood up again, a hand resting on his coiled whip. Now he was ready. He worked his way along the ridge above the ledge, looking for the way down. The scent of the air was rich, cold, almost sweet, and made him want to close his eyes again, to sleep again. Somewhere along there, the underbrush opened enough to climb down, he thought. Okay, this was it. He was about to descend when the snap of a twig brought him up short. He spun around. At first, he didn't see anything. Then he glimpsed a shadow, an arm upraised, a blade stabbing the air, rushing towards him. He blocked the blow with his forearm, grabbed the man by the wrist and elbow, and smashed his arm against his knee. The knife flew from his hand into the darkness. The attacker tried to escape, but Indy snagged his collar and pulled him back. Then he saw who it was. You bastard! Indy landed a solid punch to Grigoris's jaw and sent him reeling. He crashed against a tree trunk and slumped to the ground. He walked over to him and crouched. Grigoris's hand slithered along the ground towards the knife, serpentine, silent. Just as he reached it, Indy snapped it up. He held the blade beneath the man's chin. I don't like you very much. You make a sound and I'll remove your tonsils. Got that? He checked the man's pockets and found a handkerchief. He gagged him with it. That was good of you. Didn't have to use my own. Now, unlace your boots. Grigoris stared at him until Indy pressed the point of the knife against his neck. Do it. When he was done, Indy took the laces from him and knotted them together. Then he bound Grigoris's wrists behind his back and around a tree. It wouldn't hold him long, but it should slow him down. He'd think twice about trying anything again, or so Indy hoped. He stood up. If I see you again tonight, I'm going to throw you off the mountain. Got that? Indy made his way down to the ledge, and then to the entrance of the cave. The fire was burning low. Shannon and Conrad were still lying on the floor where he'd seen them earlier. Nearby sat a guard. One guard. Where the hell was the other one? A branch creaked overhead. He looked up, and as he did, the other guard dropped to the ledge. He swung the butt of his rifle at Indy's head. Indy ducked, then drove his head into the soldier's gut. The two of them barreled into the mouth of the cave as Indy wrestled for the rifle. Then suddenly he felt cold metal jammed behind his ear. It was the other guard. "Don't move, Malaka, or you're dead." That's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.